another instance of collapse. And we'll talk about why. Why is New Orleans an instance of collapse?
People have moved out and have not returned.
There's that. Whether in fact New Orleans is in the process of collapse and will ever regain what it had, which it won't. I bring it up because it is a very good example of something I've been working with: population size, human social traits as an evolutionary selection pressure. I don't mean that to sound quite so complicated, but New Orleans is a very good example of that. The way to think about that is, what is, the oldest form of human social organization? We call that the band. And it's not just human, of course, all primates live in bands. And then beyond that, most mammals also live in bands. So it seems to come from our mammalian brain. In other words, a band is a community of 8 to 25 people, which is essentially 2 families plus hangers-on. That's what it is. In other words, it has to be the perfect number that is just the right amount of genetic diversity to continue in a sustaining way. And a band can continue, sustain, over hundreds and hundreds of years with that much genetic diversity. 2 families plus hangers-on is enough to get the genetic diversity to keep it going. And human beings have lived in bands for 99% of all of human evolution. And that is what we call the hunter-gatherer mindset, and it does have to do with, how many people can live in one place at one time. That's what it has to do with, how many people, and not starve. Hunter-gathering, it's not so many people that can live, there's not enough food for more than that many people to live in the same place and hunt the same grounds together. And then, as we know about what we call 10,000 BC, perhaps 12,000 BC, there was a revolution in agriculture, and we have the development of the Neolithic agricultural village, which can support a population of up to 200 people, all living in the same place, and self-supporting, self-sustaining, can go on for hundreds and hundreds of the village. That agriculture, if the crop yield is enough, they're okay. The great thing about a village is self-sustaining, has everything it needs, all there. But this is where we get the development. Something happened in the late Bronze Age, and we began to have the first cities in ancient Sumer, so in the plains of the Euphrates, and 10,000 people could live in the same place at the same time. How is that even possible for so many people to be supported? There's some things you need to have. Back to the mythology of time, for instance, you can't have a city, by definition, there is no city without an accurate solar calendar, because it is the solar calendar that allows for the planting of crops in an efficient way that guarantees the food supply. Except that's what all the tells that I was showing you in ancient Iraq are about. Even then, there could be mistakes, and there could be droughts, and that would be it. The thing about a city is that it is not self-sustaining. A city is dependent upon the vassal states to bring things into it. So New Orleans is the great example in the sense that it's any city, a city by definition is not self-sustaining and cut off from supplies being brought into the city. That city will run out of supplies in 5 days. And that's exactly what happened in New Orleans. And so again, it was not that they were a bunch of primitive savages running around doing terrible things in New Orleans. It would happen to any city that was not resupplied. It would collapse. And people would steal, would kill, would do whatever they needed to do to survive, because they were starving. And so would we. And that's one of our vulnerabilities. Then you move up to this next stage of evolution, and it's kind of interesting. The classic city-state, of which Rome was the first city in human history with a population of 1 million people. How is that possible? How is it possible for 1 million people to live in the same place at the same time? It has the same vulnerabilities of the city, but also Rome, the city-states of that classical age were dependent on international trade. That was the difference. The Babylonian cities could just have the vassal states, but Rome required the entire bread basket of the Mediterranean to support it. And Rome collapsed, as we know. And then we have the modern age megalopolis, cities of 10 million people. Each of these, you see, is an order of magnitude above the other, and what it takes to sustain something like that. You could say we're dependent on industrialization, which the vast infrastructure that supports us every day that we take for granted, except when we can't take it for granted. I don't know, we had a big ice storm about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, two winters ago, up in North Andover, and it was worse in New Hampshire. It's real funny, the rain line was right in Andover, and then to my house, like another 2 miles, we had a lot of ice, but 3 more miles up into New Hampshire, so that, we were without power for 5 days. And, most people's furnaces don't run without power, and they were pretty cold. Our furnace has a self-generating current off the steam boiler. We had heat. Our neighbors didn't. They came to us because there was no heat. Also, my house is 1836. We have 7 fireplaces. If we're reduced to living in 19th century house, it's all there. And that house was heated with 7 fireplaces for 100 years without being too uncomfortable. But a modern house can't do that. I don't know, is this helpful in getting you to think a little bit anthropologically about collapse and the vulnerabilities that certain densities of population have? Anyway. One last example. You know what this is? Maybe you remember it as being happy days, happy times, right? How wonderful it was that the Berlin Wall came down. Well, perhaps to us it was wonderful, but the collapse of the Soviet Union, to those who experienced the collapse, was not so wonderful. My favorite quote from Russians, I have some Russian friends who lived through it. Do you? Maybe you know people who are actually in Russia when all this happened in 89, 90, 91, 92. The quote is, well, the collapse was very slow, and then it was very fast. And that seems to go how collapses go. It's very slow, and then it's very fast. So, what is collapse, and why are we talking about it? My definition would be a systemic and irreparable loss of structural integrity. That's just kind of really basic, because that can happen to a ship, or a building, or an organization, or an individual, or a society. Structural integrity, I mean, what is that? I mean, it's the bones that hold a thing together. I thought you might be interested in, Jung did not specifically talk about collapse as far as I can tell, although there would be a great deal more research to be done in the collected works to really see. But, pretty sure, the psychological angle on collapse is that collapse is regression. And Jung does talk a lot about regression. In fact, the psychology of regression was one of the breaking points between Jung and Freud. They had very different ideas of regression. What was happening in regression, what the purpose of regression was, and how to work with regression. So here's a quote from Jung. Regression is an involuntary, and that helps with collapse, introversion, a relapse into the past caused by a depression in the present. And to me, what's most important is regression is an involuntary introversion. You don't choose it. It just happens to you. But I think the best definition of collapse, I got started with Jared Diamond, but lately I really like the work of Joseph Tainter a lot more. His book is called The Collapse of Complex Societies from 1988. He is a historian. This is Tainter's definition of collapse. When an empire, chieftain, or tribe experiences a significant loss of an established level of socio-political complexity. Tainter is focused on complexity. How we handle complexity, how we lose complexity, and the benefits of complexity versus the declining marginal returns of complexity. So, a significant loss of an established level of complexity manifesting itself in decreases in vertical stratification, occupational specialization, regimentation, centralization, information and trade flows, literacy, artistic achievement, territorial extent, and investment into I love this, epiphenomena of civilization. In other words, palaces, temples, big stone things. And that definition goes all the way back to the very first city, ancient Sumer. And those cities had all of those things. Because that's what a city requires. Vertical stratification, occupational specialization, regimentation, centralization. That's what a city is. That's what a city does. In other words, not everybody, there is an agricultural surplus so that everybody doesn't spend all of their time invested in producing food. There is a surplus that allows some people not to be involved in that activity and have the freedom to do other things. And that's how a city works.